The summer of this year, Brad Wasatch was kayaking in the Broad River when he noticed something bobbing in the water nearby. He fished it out and found a bottle, but there was more. There was a message in that bottle. So he uncorked it and he read it. And had the name of someone, and so he did some research to find out who had sent it because he wanted to find out a little bit more about the letter. On August the 20th, he returned the note to its sender, a woman named Kathy Riddle, who in 1985 with a friend had written a note and put it in the bottle, and it sailed away. From there, it was caught by currents and probably even captured in a tropical storm until it turned up on the river. And 35 years later, she had the message she'd written. Today, we want to fish a bottle out of the streams of time, and we want to open it. It's not about hobbies or current interests. Instead, it asks a single question: how's your life? That letter that has withstood tides and storms with his message is the first letter of John, and his message and question are still as important today. What really is life, and do you have it? The truth of the gospel exposes cracks we've filled with substitutes like philosophy or pop psychology. We've all sought fulfillment in the wrong places. Instead, Christ offers the real thing: life eternal, something genuine and lasting. So John puts pen to papyrus and starts to write a letter. And in the opening verses is the word of life, shining through the silt of what was tarnishing Christianity. Just a little bit, we need to talk about this book as its beginning, as a background, because you don't understand anything without the background very well. The author is John the Apostle, a follower of Christ, the disciple whom Jesus loved, as he calls himself. He's the last survivor of hikes across Galilee, of sailing the seas, watching storms calmed, and the dead raised. A second and third generation has now arisen. Eyewitnesses are gone. So much has been changing. The Jerusalem temple was gone, and with it, the influence of Judaism. And without the eyewitnesses, reality could really take on the stature of legend or myth. So John lived in the great capital of Asia Minor, Ephesus, and he'd probably already written his gospel, although we really don't have a good timeline on that. And he writes as an older man, a father, if you will, who speaks to those who are struggling in faith. He's seen so much and experienced it all. And now it's time to leave a final message. Times were changing. And while persecution was coming, there was not the threat that it used to be. A new threat to the church was developing. The church has always thrived in persecution. However, it has not done so well with seduction. There was a noxious teaching beginning to take root. It was like the kudzu vine that took over the southeastern United States, and this would become spiritually dangerous. Within a half a century, it would gain a name called Gnosticism. It was a collision of culture that fused different elements of each. Greco-Roman thought had replaced the prophets of the Old Testament, and now Christianity was morphing into a philosophy. Nothing is ever innocent because it leaves a scar on the faith, and that was true of this teaching as well. It was focused on philosophy that taught people that you have two different things of your life, two different parts, and they don't really affect each other. There's first of all your body with its needs and its urges, and that part was evil and tarnished. It was antithetical, though, to the spirit. Now, the spirit was the other part of you, and it was distinct, totally unaffected by what happened in the body. And it really kind of taught that the soul was locked into the prison of this body, and the goal of life was to gain enough enlightenment to break the chains of that prison and get out of it. And only a special kind of knowledge and enlightenment could be attained, and ritual had to be done, and spiritual perfection had to be attained in those ways. But before you dismiss that too easily, think about what we say today. We're not too far away from that. Because regardless of how bad behavior is, there are always people who rescued themselves by saying, well, at least my heart was right. That's kind of a holdover from that old thinking. And this new teaching came with two different kinds of expressions. There's some that became ascetic. They punished the body for its role and its evil. And they took leather straps and even chains and would whip their own backs and beat it into submission. And it didn't make much difference because how much pain was suffered, because the body really did matter. If you could free the soul, the pain was worth it. The other, though, was more popular and hence more prevalent. People became libertines who indulged the body. Morality became a way to satisfy the most base urges of a man, and it was unacceptable, rather, it was acceptable because it did not touch the spirit, which was walled off from it. So indulge the body and be spiritual on the inside is all that they spoke. And it really never disappeared. Modern cults demonstrate perverted lifestyles while claiming some form of spirituality in the name of religion. And most of them fit very well with the closing decade of the first century. One who best shows this problem was a teacher named Cerinthus. Cerinthus also lived in Ephesus, the same city of John's residence. He taught it differently, though. He taught that Jesus was only a man, albeit an exemplary man, perhaps the best man that had ever been born. Now, that's not too far from where we live today either, because we have thinking in various circles that say Jesus was not divine, but he was one of the best moral guides the world has ever seen. It's the same thinking, dressed up in a sport coat and an open collar. But Cerinthus went on. He said, at the baptism of John, the Spirit of God came and it infused the body of Jesus of Nazareth with something called the Christ. And Jesus did not work miracles, but Christ did. And when it came to the cross, Christ then left and the man Jesus died on the cross. He was only a man when he died. There was nothing divine about his death. Now, John saw this obviously as a dangerous way of saying Jesus was not who he said he was. The church historian Eusebius tells us that John was entering a public bathhouse in Ephesus one day when he saw Cerinthus inside, and he refused to even go in. He said, "Let us flee, lest the bathhouse fall, because Cerinthus, the enemy of the truth, is within." Such teaching was insidious because it corrupted all the areas of Christian thought and life. It affected the nature of Jesus. They taught the incarnation was impossible because a divine spirit could not be inside of a filthy body. And they found a way to handle problems that might arise, those thorny things, such as, well, Jesus did miracles, didn't he? They used a teaching called Docetism, or as one scholar called it, semism. The idea was that Jesus seemed to be God, and the Greek word doceo means to seem. He just appeared to be God. Jesus didn't do the miracles. He just appeared to. It's kind of like what happens in the current practices today. Recently, in one of the Star Wars movies, one of the actors died in the middle of filming, and it was too late to start recutting the whole film and rewriting the entire script. So they ended up using computer-generated images of the person to make it appear that they were alive and in the movie. Now, that may be really great for Hollywood, but makes really horrible doctrine for Christianity. If you want to dismiss the divinity of Jesus, there was only one single avenue, and that was just to dismiss him as being the Son of God completely. And you can dress it up however you want to, but it still came down to the same thing. But this also created great division within church fellowships, because it taught that there were special people who had hidden or secret knowledge, and these were the elite Christians. These were the people who took their spirituality seriously, and they created split churches. They were the knowers, and then everybody else was the hoi polloi, those who did not know. And if you were one of the knowers, you had a place in the fellowship, and if you didn't have that knowledge, you were out. Those are seductive things for mankind, because we all have a desire to be special. And it's very attractive to us because it allowed them the ability to live a very corrupt life and be spiritual at the same time. At least that's what they thought. It provided them this special kind of license to do as you please, but think highly about God. And no wonder it swept through the church. So John, with all of that background, all of that swirling in his culture around him, all of that in his mind, he begins this book with words that seem to echo the gospel he's already written. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen, which we have looked at and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. John starts with a neuter, the that, something that doesn't seem to have personality, yet within a few short words, it's apparent the that is really Jesus, who embodies the word of life. He brings it to earth. He makes it concrete. But what is this word of life? Is it just the man Jesus? What exactly was he talking about when he's life? He talked about life. Well, there's more to life than just working and eating and sleeping and playing. You can do all those things and really not experience life. It was meant to be experienced. Eric Weiner wrote a book called Man Seeks God, and in it he describes the life man really needs, even using his own personal experience. He says the 17th century French philosopher Blaise Pascal coined the term God-shaped hole to describe a yawning void that was in the human condition. And he says, over the years, I've attempted to fill my God-shaped hole with all manner of stuff: food, sex, fancy tote bags, success, more food, travel, drugs, books, more food, leather-bound notebooks, red Zinfandel, Cuban cigars, yet more good food, pretentious foreign films, and once briefly and ill-advisedly, a concoction of Guinness and Jack Daniels imbibed through a plastic funnel. There's a lot of people in our world that could be their journal entry of their life. I've tried it all and found nothing that's worth living for. So it is in this life, the life beyond philosophy, beyond that daily grind, that John writes this letter. All the other ways of life are nothing but pale substitutes for the life Christ offers to those who embrace it. But after quickly giving you the broad overview subject of his letter, he moves on to the object of the letter itself, Jesus. And you find in the traits that Jesus emphasized what Jesus, in it, there are three traits that John emphasizes about Jesus to a world that is quickly dismissing him. The first is this word of life is eternal. We tend to be historical. We want to know, when did it happen? Now, I love to read history because it places humanity in various contexts and various situations. When you read of Alexander the Great making his way through Europe and conquering Asia Minor, you ask, well, what happened before that, or what happened after that? And we talk about our founding fathers like Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Hamilton, but yet they were just infants in a crib compared to the time itself. And what John says, you have to step outside of time, and there you find Christ. That which was from the beginning. That which was from the beginning. Christ had no beginning, only existence. Because the gospel is not history, because it's beyond history. Jesus is not bound by circumstances, and neither is his message. It does not depend on a political system or an economic system. It existed before any human being or any human institution, before the worst dictators or the best leaders. He's the Son of God in poverty, the destructive storms that batter cities, or when people sing happy days are here again. But it's hard for us as Christians to divorce the life of Christ from the life we experience. We live such a time-bound experience that we have a date of birth and a date of death. We have a birth certificate and a death certificate. We have a year, 2 years separated by hyphens on tombstones. But Christ didn't. He had no birth date. Not really. Oh, yes, he was born into human flesh, but he existed long before that, before Adam and Eve. Before God said, let there be light, he was there. And it's so hard for us because everything we hold dear, even the ground we stand on, the word was before that. It was over that. It doesn't come out of human experience, but it does inform human experience. But that sounds so ethereal, so larger than life, so mystical. And yet John takes this eternal, ethereal concept and puts flesh and sinew in it. John wants you to make sure that you understand that Jesus is not a myth or a legend. There's some man-made stories, but Jesus was not a Zeus, and he wasn't Paul Bunyan. And he lays emphasis on that fact by short, clipped words that explain his experiences. First, he says, while it was eternal, it made an appearance. Usually we think of eternal things as invisible to the human eye. And yet, one of the things that John says is that Jesus became visible to us. The life appeared. We've seen it and testified to it. It appeared, as John put it. While the Old Testament kept the gauze of prophecy over the appearance of Jesus, it finally came into full view and a sharp relief, dressed in human flesh. God opened the curtain so that man could see what life could really be. John said, I experienced that. He uses these words that describe the sensory experience of mankind and his own. He said, we saw him with our own eyes. We have looked at him and our hands have touched him. This we proclaim concerning the word of life. I heard him. I heard in my own ears. I heard the pitch and timbre of his voice. I heard him preach the Sermon on the Mount. I watched the words come out of his mouth. I watched as he talked gently to children and harshly to Pharisees. I heard him. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. I heard him. But then he goes on to say, and I saw him with my own eyes. We have seen. Oh, that's not an idle glance. It's a word that means to stare in wonder. The way he says is, we saw and we kept watching. That's how he puts it. You can just imagine the disciples standing there looking at Jesus and just fixing their gaze upon him, saying, who is this man? Who is he? What is he? I've never seen this before. And it's just that staring at what he could be like. And it was a sight that lingered and remained with John, even though his old man eyes had begun to dim. He saw Jesus with his own eyes. Then he goes on to say, we touched him with our own hands. Now, while John mentions it, Luke described it at the end of his gospel. He said, look at my hands and my feet. It is I, myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have. Think about it. John could touch the raw flesh created by iron nails. He could see the bones as the fingers moved into a grasp. He could see a face come to a grimace or smile as eyebrows were lifted, as wrinkle lines on the forehead would be gathered, as a touch of a hand would be gentle. He could touch his face, feel his ribs, feel the texture, feel how the skin. See, John says the word that I use, that I choose the word here, I use it for grope. Something that you feel around for, you hold on to, and you mash, and you take a lot of time with. I guess it's best described by this old story of the blind men and the elephant. There are four blind men that encountered an elephant. They didn't know what it was, and so all they could do was feel at it to describe it. And so one fiddled with the tail and concluded that an elephant had to be like a rope. Another touched the massive side of the elephant, and he decided that it was like a wall. The third wrapped his arms around a leg and determined that it had to be like the trunk of a tree. But the last felt the twisting trunk and just knew it was like a snake. But you see, the touch is what gave them the sense of what it was like. And that's what John says. We felt him. So with the touch of a hand, John says that the idea that Jesus Christ is not a man is nothing more than the myth. That's the myth. The real Jesus had flesh and bone and life, just as we did. He says, I heard, I saw, I felt. Christianity is not an idea you roll around in your mind. It's God slipping on a flesh suit. So God takes our form so we can understand him. he becomes real, just as real as he was in heaven, but he becomes real on earth. So John can only verify one single idea. He's only doing this to say, I can testify. The life appeared. We have seen it and testified to it. And we proclaim to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and has appeared to us. He uses that word martyr or witness. And John says we were eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses are not allowed to give their opinion about how they feel about something or what they think about it, only what they see. They tell no stories, they only relate experiences. And for John, the best proof of God's entry into the world was not just what he saw others say, but what I myself have experienced. I have heard, I have felt, I have touched, I have seen. Jesus does not come to us as an idea, but as a man to be experienced. The third manifestation of that word is it's relational. John gives this build up to show that we could have a relationship with both Christ's body on earth, the church, and with God the Father, Jesus, his Son. We proclaim to you what we have seen and heard so that you may also have fellowship with us. And our fellowship is with the Father and with the Son, Jesus Christ. Fellowship is a huge word for John, but when we use it, it comes out of our mouth with the taste of uncooked oatmeal. But John makes it more than just sharing or sitting in a room together or sharing the same space. And it's more than just splitting an apple in equal parts. Fellowship sets aside private interest and desires to join in a common process and a common purpose. It's grasping onto the life of the gospel, not just admiring it. The basis of this fellowship is not just that we like each other, that's social fellowship. But it's more than that. We together serve the risen Christ, and together we accomplish his purpose for this world. It's a together word, one centered around the devotion to the Master. And it's not just in the church with God the Father and Jesus the Son. We participate with God in real ways. And fellowship is more than a pot roast on a Sunday afternoon. He wants in this letter to drive home a central issue. How can you have true fellowship with Christ and with God? Is it because you have some sort of special knowledge? Is it because you're elite? And do people include you or exclude you, or is that God's decision? That's the issue that John wants us to wrestle with in this book. So John closes the introduction with his true purpose. We write this to make our joy complete. He wants his joy to reach an apex. He knows when people are in fellowship with God and Christ, it makes both the master and the disciple smile. And yet, when we look back at this introduction, what do we glean from our lesson? I think one of those things is Christianity is not just an idea. I think one of the problems that John faced and that we do at the same time in Christianity is we make it a set of proofs or propositions to agree with or disagree with. We make it into a discussion group item. And many really have just reduced Christianity to a series of truths with a yes or no answer. And we're tempted to turn Christ himself into these kind of statements. We ask, do you believe this or not believe this? Do you accept it or not accept it? And in doing so, we become nothing more than Christian philosophers. Christianity is not about statements you agree with or disagree with. It's not a creed, whether spoken or unspoken, that you hold to. It's grabbing hold of the Savior and not letting him go. It's staring in his face and meticulously following his example. That's the way we follow Jesus. It's not philosophy, it's personal. But the second, I think, is that Christianity is being a part of something, not apart from it. The idea of fellowship is woven through this book, as we will see. What gives you fellowship and what breaks that fellowship? John encourages people in all walks of life to walk with Christ together. There seems to be a poison that's creeping through our churches today. And that's if the church is really about me, please me, listen to me, meet my needs. And by the way, my needs are always my wants. So we seek the right program that I like or the right person that I like. And yet, fellowship, true fellowship, means giving up what you want for what is best, both for your life and the lives of others. So, John wants to broach this true fellowship that we have in Christ, a true fellowship that comes out of life that is so in love with Christ that it forgets itself. And if you have Him, you have enough. Tragically, some don't. They have a very empty life. Cornelius Gurlitt didn't have that kind of life. He was an 80-year-old German citizen who became the owner of 1,400 pieces of art. More than 500 of those were looted by the Nazis. Bavarian officials took the artworks, but Mr. Gurlitt has continued to claim ownership of them based upon legal grounds. In a recent interview, he described losing the pictures as more painful than the death of my father in a 1956 car crash, or my mother's death, or my sister becoming ill with cancer. I've never loved anything more in my life than my pictures, including another person. The pictures are somewhere in a basement now, and I'm alone. What do these people want from me? I only want to live with my pictures. John would ask you, is not your life more than pictures in a basement? Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again next Sunday.